Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to give a short presentation on some ideas we have in BT Research about how we can leverage the power of ICT to better manage energy consumption. So I had prepared a short introduction, but these ideas, I have a feeling, are turning quickly into a mantra here. But basically, we can do a lot of things in the area of reducing the need for people to travel through things like video conferencing and telepresence, as some of you have experienced here yesterday. What's interesting is that this is fast becoming one of the key sales arguments for this technology. I lifted this quote from the front page of BT conferencing webpage. We can also do a lot in the area of reducing the need for material goods transportation, so that is being called dematerialization. Of course, we can do this by increasing the level of network content delivery, either through video on demand or things like e-books, whatever technology allows us to reduce the need to print material or manufacture material and get it to the customer. What I'm more specializing in at the moment, though, is the area of demand-side management. So demand-side management is defined as methodologies to affect the way customers distribute the load on the system. I took this data from a US Energy Information Administration website. It shows you some figures about how DSM has affected the total energy consumption in the US from 1989 to 2005. So demand-side management is generally divided into two sub domains. One of them is improving energy efficiency, and of course we've heard a lot about how you can improve your energy efficiency by replacing old kit with more efficient kit from an energy efficiency point of view. The second bit being load management. Now the interesting thing about this curve is that whatever way you look at it, and there is some complexity hidden here, but I don't have any time to talk about it, it seems to have plateaued somewhere around 1995. And that is pointing at the fact that DSM needs new techniques and new practices to reach its full potential. So basically, in terms of the load management part of DSM, there are two, again, subcategories. One of them involves having a contractual agreement between the utility and the consumer, which is primarily applied to commercial and industrial customers. So basically, that means that the utility gets direct control over the demand by the customer and can curb it to reduce peak demand. The other technique that has been used is simply to use price incentives to move the flexible load off-peak. This is more applicable to the residential market, but the problem is that by definition it requires that the end user is informed and able to act upon price differentials. This effectively means that it's limited to a very simplistic coarse-grained approach. We have examples like day rate, night rate, and that's pretty much as far as you can go. And this means it's mostly suitable to micromanagement, by which we mean something like this. So this is the actual consumption of electricity in the UK just 1 year in the past from now. So the orange curve is the actual consumption, and the green curve is what could be achieved in an ideal world if we had efficient macro management. So what it means is basically you can flatten the curve around the average, but critically you don't change the total consumption. Basically the total demand on the grid is unchanged. It's simply more homogeneously distributed over time. So that already has some interesting advantages. It's by no means a negligible gain, because it means that you can do things like downscaling and optimizing the power generation infrastructure. So for example, you don't have to keep gas turbines on standby just to be ready at the switch of a button when the peak shows up. And I've read recently in a German study that keeping these gas turbines on standby, they are only 20% efficient. It also provides direct opportunities for ICT because at the interface of things like smart metering and billing, there is a huge amount of information that needs to be processed, collected, and so there is definitely an opportunity for industry to be involved in that, in macro-scale demand-side management. However, it does not directly improve our ability to use microgeneration and renewable sources, which we believe is the key to reducing carbon emissions in the long run. So now I'm shifting to what is really what we're doing right now in BT, which is to investigate techniques from ICT to do demand-side micromanagement, by which we mean fine-grained scheduling of individual energy-consuming processes. So we're not talking about shifting the load off-peak, but we're talking about switching the start and stop of individual appliances by a few minutes maybe. It can potentially make a huge difference if it's applied to local communities. Of course, you can imagine that if you apply this on huge groups of people, because of the random fluctuation, you don't gain anything. But, and as many speakers have mentioned before, there is a key community aspect to the whole problem of reducing carbon emissions. So let me give you an example here. This is basically a curve I've generated from the previous one, which was for the national average, but simply I made it a lot more coarse-grained to make it look like it is just a local curve for a few households. And then you have the base load. Imagine that this is not flexible. There's nothing you can do about it. But then you have 3 people, 3 households who happen to want to do their laundry at about the same time. And typically, you know, all these appliances, they have a very peaky consumption profile. So if you have these people not coordinating their activity, you could end up with a very big peak because they happen to be unfortunate and that the 3 appliances are peaking at the same time. Of course, what you could do is if you are able to shift the load just by 30 minutes or 1 hour, you could be in a situation where you basically flatten the old demand. So the demand hasn't changed again, but the peak has been flattened considerably simply by virtue of having offset the beginning of the processes for your 3 households. But you could do even more actually with this technology. You can also tap into the local energy supply more efficiently, and that means that you are able to use renewable sources more efficiently. So imagine that, or as well as having consuming processes, some of these people also have microgeneration facilities, which in this case I've illustrated by solar panels and a wind turbine, and that these different these different generators come on at different times of the day. So this is just zooming at just the part that would come from renewable. So forget the base load, look at just the renewable part, which is available between, in this particular example, between 8 a.m. in the morning and 7 p.m. and basically is distributed between those 2 different sources. Now, look at, this is superimposing to this local microgeneration profile, the demand profile I've just created before, just by flattening the load. And what you can see here is that you have the demand that relates to these 3 flexible processes. So the three laundries are broken down between energy that comes from the grid, energy that comes from one of these participating users, solar panels, and energy that comes from one of the participating users, wind turbine. And basically what you see is that you have, that's the dashed part, some of the renewable energy that is available is actually not being used by these people locally. So what you've done here by flattening the load is reducing the peak, but you don't make the best use possible of the locally available supply. So what you can do still, if you add a little bit more intelligence in the system, is actually shift the load not just to flatten the peak, but also to make it match the local supply better. And in this case, what we've done is basically we've shifted one of the users' load by another 30 minutes in the future. And basically that allows us to rely a lot less on the baseline energy generation from the grid and make the best use possible of the local supply. Now, obviously, ICT is a key enabler to any microscale combination of power generation and demand-side management, just by virtue of the fact that there is a lot of information processing involved in making this happen. So typically, you need 3 things. One of them is to collect and share information about the current or predicted output of local renewable sources. You need to be able to identify and evaluate opportunities to redistribute the flexible load so as to maximize autonomy from the grid, which is the example I've just shown. And you must be able to implement the preferred schedule by being able to talk to smart appliances and make them start and stop or pause whenever it's feasible so as to adjust the load to the supply. And so basically, so far in research, a lot of, so far there are 2 approaches that are very well documented about this. One of them is just basically brute force. You just centralize all the information and you have this kind of monstrous Big Brother-ish approach to it. Basically, you have a central computer that schedules all the washing machines in the country, which is obviously not very practical. And then there is a lot of research work going on, not particularly in BT, about a decentralized approach that uses negotiation between software agents. So basically you have agents that bid on behalf of their owners, selling power or buying power and negotiating so that basically you don't need a human in the loop, which means that you can achieve a much more fine-grained distribution of processes. However, and this is the approach we are advocating in BT, we think that there is also a third way, which is basically also a bottom-up approach, fully decentralized, but only involves a smart meter that could be actually at the dumb end of the smart spectrum and a broadband connection. So imagine that you have this teaming of appliances here, and that this is repeated on many households. So you could end up with a situation where all these smart meters talk to each other and schedule the appliances that are connected to them based on the information that they collect by gossiping with each other. So in this case, imagine that you start in a situation where you have a good balance between the local supply and the local demand, because two of your users are both generating energy and they're also consuming it at the same time. And so basically the system is at a steady state. But now imagine that a third consumer wants to start a process. And basically what would happen in our scenario is that this would trigger a kind of request of information in this overlay, so that basically the system determines whether there is local supply available at that time or not. So in this case it isn't, so basically the process is put on standby. And basically the system keeps asking whether it's a good time to start the laundry. And now only when these power generators come in line, then the standby is released and basically the process can go ahead and you still achieve this balance between supply and demand without any centralized information processing. Okay, so reaching my conclusions here. ICT offers obvious opportunities for substituting information transfer to physical movement. We've heard a lot about this. And actually, this is, we shouldn't dismiss this. I mean, this is probably where we could make the biggest difference in the short to medium term. However, as we've heard from many speakers here, the war against climate change has to be fought on several fronts and on multiple timescales. In the long run, it might be impossible to avoid reducing our society's appetite for energy as a whole. And it is our conviction that automated management of the flexible load and an increased ability to tap in renewable source could be the key to a soft landing in that area. Thank you.